I suppose the story of Mary's Meals really starts in 1983. I was only 14 years of age, and we were sitting at our breakfast table at home in Scotland one morning. And my sister was reading the paper, the Glasgow Herald, and she said suddenly, "Look, it says here that there are reports that the Virgin Mary is appearing to teenagers in Yugoslavia, as it was then." And we began saying to our mother and father, if it's even possible that that might be true, surely we should go and see for ourselves. And to our amazement, Mum and Dad said, "Okay, we're busy." They had a small guest house they were running. "We're busy at the moment. Why don't you go and see?" So we did, a group of us, teenagers. My sister was the oldest of us at 19. I was the youngest at 14 years of age. And we went off to Medjugorje in Yugoslavia. And that was 1983, long before many pilgrims started going there. And the week that we spent there with the local family and spending time with the visionaries there really changed our lives, really renewed our faith. And when we returned home, Mum and Dad could see that something had changed in us. And they were amazed. They were so amazed they went themselves shortly afterwards and had a similar experience. And when they returned home, they felt that God was asking them to turn our home, which was a small hotel, into a retreat centre, a family house of prayer. And that's what it became, Craig Lodge Family House of Prayer. And our Bishop of Argyll and the Isles gave us permission to have the Blessed Sacrament there. And this little prayer community grew and grew until this day. And it's a place where many people come just to spend time with the Lord, time in prayer. So that's my background. That's how I grew up. And if we forward wind about 10 years, in my early 20s, I was a fish farmer, a salmon farmer off the west coast of Scotland. I was chronically shy. If somebody had said to me then that God would have me doing this work, going around the world giving public talks, I never would have believed them. I would have run a mile if God had asked me to do that then. But luckily our Lord is very gentle. So in 1992, I was having a pint of beer in my local pub one evening with my brother. And by then, the war in Bosnia was at its height. And we were talking to each other about a terrible news item we'd watched that evening on the television about the way people were suffering in refugee camps in Bosnia. And we said to each other, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could just do one small thing to help the people in Bosnia? And so the next day we started asking people for food and clothing and blankets. And about 3 weeks after that conversation in the pub, we found ourselves driving this small truck full of aid out to Bosnia. And I always say that was the first big miracle in the story. It was the first time that my brother and I ever hatched a plan in a pub that actually happened. So that was amazing enough. But I came back home at the end of that week, having delivered the aid, thinking really that I'd done my good deed and that it would be back to work as normal on the fish farm. But God had a completely different plan, because by the time I got home, all these things that we'd asked for, all the food and clothing, had continued to pour into our home. There were mountains of it at home. So at that point I prayed about it and I thought about it, and I decided to sell my home and gave up my job, and I began driving a truck back and forth from Scotland to Bosnia. And I said to God, well, I'll do this as long as there's a need and as long as people keep giving. And I suppose I thought maybe it would go on for a few months or maybe a year at most. And here we are, all these years later. It's something that never ceases to amaze me and surprise me and make me feel grateful that this work has grown all the years since. And that first year, 1993, really pretty much I was driving back and forth continuously, the trucks of aid, and it was a very blessed year for me, especially because I met my wife that year. She was a nurse who gave up her job in Scotland to drive trucks also to Bosnia. And we met, and she was helping drive the aid there. And to begin with, we were driving the small trucks that anyone with a normal car license can drive. And then as it grew, we had to go and sit our HGV tests to drive these big articulated trucks. And of course, Julie passed her test first time and I failed. So but I think it was a good preparation for a good marriage, because we're happily married today with 7 kids. And I wouldn't be able to do this work without a wife who feels as passionate about this mission as I do, and who supports me in many amazing ways. The first 10 years of this work, after those deliveries of aid to Bosnia, we were doing all kinds of things. We were opening homes for children who were abandoned in Romania. We were working with street children in Latin America. We started running primary healthcare clinics in West Africa, nearly always through missionary priests that we knew in different parts of the world. And then in 2002, this beautiful work of Mary's Meals was born. 2002 was a terrible year of famine across southern Africa, and Malawi was the worst affected country. And we began working there, doing emergency feeding, bringing food into villages where people were facing starvation. And during the course of that work in this particular village, the local parish priest took me to meet a family. And he explained to me before I went into their home that the father of the family had died sometime previously, and that the mother was now dying as well. She had AIDS. And the mother was called Emma. And when I went into her home, Emma was lying on her mud floor, and she had her 6 children sitting around her. And when we began speaking, she said to me, "You know, there's nothing left now except to pray that somebody's going to look after my children when I die." And she was really panicking about that because of the number of orphans in that village. And then I started talking to her oldest child sitting beside her, and he was called Edward, and Edward was about 14 years old. And at one point in the conversation, maybe like you'd say to any young person you meet, I said, "Edward, what's your hope in life? What's your ambition?" And he said to me, "I'd like to have enough food to eat, and I would like to be able to go to school one day." And that was the extent of his ambition at 14 years of age. And that was something that we'd encountered over and over again. We kept on meeting children who were out of school because they were hungry, because they were doing whatever it took to survive. They might have been begging on street corners, or working in rubbish dumps, or working in the fields with their parents, just doing whatever it took to survive, and therefore missing out on their education. And yet at the same time, over and over again, it's been proven that a basic education for all is the key to lifting the world's poorest communities out of poverty. And so Mary's Meals just became this very simple idea, this simple concept to try and help children like Edward escape that cycle of poverty, just simply by providing one good meal every day in a place of education. And so we began in Malawi, the end of that year, 2002, and we began by having a public meeting, and we said to the people that came, "We've got this idea to start serving meals in your school, but we'll only do it if you believe it's a good idea. In fact, we'll only do it if you want to take responsibility for this project more than we ever can from the outside. And we would invite you, if you believe in it, to organize the daily cooking and serving of the food as volunteers in the community." And immediately the people at that meeting said, "Yes, this is what we want for our children." And they began to organize rotas of volunteers to come in and cook every day. And so we began serving the food. And from the beginning, we wanted to buy the food as much as possible locally to help the local farmer, to help the local economy. So we began buying the food locally in Malawi, and the meals began to be served. And almost immediately we could see this wasn't just a nice idea, it was something that would really work. And then children who used to come to school just every now and again, or who would be absent a lot because of sickness, began coming every day. And then after some time, we began to see reports from the schools saying that academic performance had improved because children who used to sit there all day hungry could now concentrate and learn with the food. And almost immediately the next village came to us and said, "Can we have Mary's Meals as well, please?" And we said yes, and so it went on and on. And as well as in Malawi, we then started being invited into schools in other countries as well. Liberia, for example, in West Africa, that had just finished its terrible civil war. So many children out of school there, so many children who'd been forced to become child soldiers there. And when we started serving the meals in Liberia, we saw the same thing happening, children coming to school who had never been before. And the work has just gone on like that ever since, just growing and growing. So that today around the world, we're feeding nearly 900,000 children every single school day. And it never ceases to amaze me when I think about this work. And when I do think about this work, I always just think of it as a series of lots and lots of little acts of love. None of us are doing anything very spectacular involved in Mary's Meals. We're all just doing what we can. Nearly all the funding that comes in to buy the food comes from people making small donations. To feed a child for an entire school year costs us only €14.50 on average around the world. That's what it costs for an entire school year. So a small donation can literally change the life of a hungry child. And yet at the same time today we know probably about 18,000 children will have died of hunger-related causes around the world today. And I know when we started this work of Mary's Meals, sometimes I would share that our vision for Mary's Meals is that every child in the world receives at least one good meal every day in their place of education. And I know initially when I would say that when giving talks, people would look at me like I'd completely lost the plot to have a vision so grand, so ambitious. But the more I see this work unfold every day around the world and grow in so many beautiful ways, the more I really do believe that vision is possible. And the more I believe that it's much more mad that children are dying of hunger in this world of plenty. I think there's a commonly held myth out there that people are hungry because there's too many people in the world. And that's simply not true. We're producing more than enough food for all of us in this world. So all of us involved in this work are driven on by that vision and by the next child who's waiting for Mary's Meals. And it's beautiful at this stage to go to the projects and meet children who are now leaving school and who are going on to a completely different life, who tell me they never would have gone to school at all without those meals. Recently I was in Haiti, in some of the worst slums there where we provide the meals, and they've just started a new project there for they call them the barefoot children, the children living on the streets, and they come in when formal school finishes, again because we serve them a meal and are introduced to education for the first time. And it was wonderful to go to those classes and to see that the students who had left school last year are now coming back in to volunteer their time to teach these street kids. And I was talking to some of them were at college, and they were talking about how they were studying agriculture and how their passion was to help the people of Haiti grow enough food so that they would no longer be reliant on aid. And that's what Mary's Meals is all about. It's those young people that are going to lift Haiti out of poverty, or young people like them in Malawi that are going to lift their nation out of poverty. Because this work of Mary's Meals, it isn't about a whole lot of us in the richer countries giving to people in Africa or Haiti who are just waiting for our help. It's about a whole lot of us walking together, doing what we can in our own particular situations. But I'm also reminded over and over again when I visit those countries that Mary's Meals at another level is just simply keeping children alive every day. A year or two ago I was in Malawi, and I visited this primary school, and the teachers introduced me to two young boys in the school, and the older one was called Peter. He was 12 years old, and his younger brother was called Lazaro, and he was 3 years old. And the teachers told me their story. They said a few weeks before I visited, they had started to notice that Peter, the older brother, had been coming to school late every morning. And so they investigated at home to see what was happening. And they discovered that the boy's mother had died. So Peter, at 12 years old, had become the head of the household. And he did his best to look after his brother. And Peter, the older one, would receive the meals we were serving every day at school. But then after a few weeks, Lazaro got sick. We run nurseries as well. We provide meals for children under 6 years old as well, below school age. And he discovered that we had one of those centres about a mile from his house. And every morning he began, before school, he would carry his little brother Lazaro to this under 6 centre. And only when he put him there safely and knew that he would be fed there for the day did he carry on to school himself, which is why he was late every morning. That little boy, Peter, had just saved his little brother's life. And it reminded me again that this work of Mary's Meals is literally saving lives every day around the world. So more than anything tonight, I would just like to ask you to pray for our work. I believe it is another sign of God's mercy in this world. And I would just ask you to pray that we reach more of those children who are waiting for Mary's Meals today. And I would ask you to pray that we always do this work in a way that honours our Blessed Mother and honours her Son. And if you would like to know more about our work or to find out about how you might get involved, you're welcome to speak to us at the end of Mass. Thank you very much for listening.